parents? What's the worst judgment call you've ever made? I was at my daughter's therapy clinic when a man asked, "Want to be my fake girlfriend at my high school reunion?" I stared at him. "I can't let bullies see I'm single. In exchange, I'll get you free Chili's for a year. You got yourself a deal." He never mentioned that the bullying was for touching a 7th grader when he was a senior. So I never mentioned that my brother was the chief of police who'd kill for me. The next day, I invited him over to discuss reunion prep. He immediately noticed my adopted daughter Lily peeking from behind the couch. "Is that your assistant?" he asked sarcastically. It was the first time I'd seen her laugh with a stranger. Within minutes, they were rolling the ball back and forth while he asked about favorite restaurants and movies. "Mommy hates when you eat ice cream before dinner," Lily announced, and he wrote it down. I threw a pillow at them both. He caught it one-handed without breaking eye contact with me. The smile on his face made my stomach flip. On Wednesday, he texted asking if we could practice looking coupley. Showed up with takeout from 3 different places because he couldn't remember which one I said I liked. Lily ate it while she watched us sloppily slow dance in my kitchen. "You're stepping on her!" she shrieked with delight. He lifted me slightly off the ground, spinning us both. Better? The way he looked down at me like I was something precious made me forget this was practice. I had no idea how dark things were about to get. From there, he started teaching Lily soccer in the backyard while I cooked. Through the window, I watched him celebrate dramatically every time she kicked the ball. She was calling him daddy by day 3. When she fell and scraped her knee, he carried her inside, cleaned it gently while telling her about his own soccer scars. She laughed through her tears. I should have known some things really are just too good to be true. On Thursday, something shifted. We were sitting on my couch when tears started streaming down his face. "These people at the reunion, they destroyed me senior year," he choked out. "I just need them to see that I'm good with kids now, that I have a family." He grabbed my hands. "Can you tell them how Lily trusts me? Maybe even mention that we're thinking of adopting another one?" His vulnerability broke my heart. "Whatever you need," I promised. Looking back, I should have known that no man shows vulnerability so quickly. Friday night was movie night. He brought Finding Nemo and insisted on making it special with a blanket fort. Lily crawled in first, then him, patting the spot between his legs. "Safest spot for the princess," he said. She snuggled back against his chest while he wrapped his arms around her, hands resting on her tummy. When Nemo's mom died, she turned to bury her face in his neck. He rocked her gently, whispering something I couldn't hear. His hand moved up and down her back under her pajama top. "Skin to skin helps with trauma," he'd explained earlier. "You know I'm keeping you after the reunion, right?" I said it like a joke but meant every word. "Promise?" I was so busy falling for him that I missed the monster underneath. Saturday morning, he arrived at my doorstep early. His hands were trembling. Lily gave him her drawing. "So, you remember us at the party?" He knelt down, hugging her waist. "I could never forget you, princess." The drive to his old high school was quiet. He kept checking his mirrors, adjusting his tie, squeezing my hand at red lights. "Hey," I said, touching his face. "They can't hurt you anymore." He smiled and nodded. We had just made it in the door when, suddenly, some random man threw a bottle of beer into his face. "Hey, look, it's Training Wheels!" the man shouted. My fake boyfriend went rigid, turned to me with pleading eyes. "They bullied me in senior year. Someone thought it was funny to call me Training Wheels because I helped tutor the little ones, and they still call me that stupid nickname." "A-holes," I muttered. We made rounds, me playing the perfect girlfriend, telling everyone how amazing he was with my daughter. "She calls him daddy already," I gushed to a group of women. One of them went pale. "Excuse me," she said, rushing off. I figured she was just a jealous ex, until 20 minutes later, when I headed to the bathroom. 3 women were waiting by the sinks. The pale one from earlier locked the door behind me. "Ladies, he's taken," I laughed. She looked at her friends, then at me. "You said you have a daughter?" My stomach tightened. "Yeah, she's 10. The women exchanged looks. "How long have you known him?" "Long enough." "Why?" The crying one took a shaky breath. "That nickname, Training Wheels. Do you know why they really call him that?" I laughed nervously. "Because he tutored kids?" The crying woman stepped closer. "He was caught with my little sister when she was 10. He was in senior year." Her friends held her shoulders. "She'd just learned to ride a bike. That's why they called him Training Wheels. The school covered it up because his dad was on the board, but everyone knew." She grabbed my wrist. "You have a 10-year-old? Get her the hell away from him." The bathroom stall door couldn't support my weight as I slid down to the floor. Everything clicked. My fingers shook texting the babysitter. No answer. The women held me up as I called my brother, the chief of police. "David, I need you to get here." Now the guy I'm with, they're saying he touched a 10-year-old. My voice cracked. "I've been letting him near Lily. He taught her soccer. He held her. I'll be right there." The bathroom door slammed open so hard it bounced off the wall and David rushed in with 2 officers behind him. His face went from cop mode to Big Brother rage when he saw me on the floor with mascara running down my face. The women started talking over each other, telling him about Training Wheels and what happened with a 10-year-old girl years ago. I pushed myself up using the sink while my legs shook like jelly. David grabbed my shoulders and pulled me against his chest. "There's already an officer at your place checking on Lily," he said into my hair. His whole body was tense like a coiled spring ready to snap. "Where is he?" The rage in his voice made me flinch. I pointed toward the main hall with a shaking hand. David nodded to his officers and they headed out while the pale woman grabbed my wrist. "I'll testify about everything if you need me to," she said. The other women nodded and helped me to a chair in the hallway, while David barked orders into his radio. My fingers kept hitting redial on the babysitter's number, but it went straight to voicemail every time. People from the reunion were starting to gather in the hallway, whispering and pointing. Then Training Wheels appeared around the corner with the 2 officers flanking him. His face went from confused to scared when he saw me surrounded by cops. "This is all a misunderstanding," he started saying, his hands moving frantically. "People are spreading lies about me from years ago." David stepped between us and I'd never seen him look so dangerous. "You're being detained for questioning regarding child endangerment," he said in his official cop voice. Training Wheels' whole fake nice guy act crumbled right there. "I want a lawyer," he snapped, all that charm gone like it never existed. The officers cuffed him while everyone from our graduating class watched. My phone finally rang and I almost dropped it trying to answer. The officer at my apartment said Lily was safe and sound asleep in her bed. The babysitter's phone had died and she'd been trying to call me from her laptop but couldn't remember my number. Relief made my knees buckle again. David caught my arm and assigned one of his officers to drive me home while he dealt with the scene. The bathroom women crowded around me, putting their numbers in my phone and promising to give statements about what they knew. The officer led me to his patrol car, while people stared and whispered. The drive home felt like it took forever. Every red light made me want to scream. I kept seeing all the times Training Wheels had been alone with Lily. The blanket fort where he'd pulled her between his legs, his hands under her pajama top during the movie. The way he'd whispered things I couldn't hear. My stomach twisted so hard I had to roll down the window for air. The officer kept glancing at me in the mirror but didn't say anything. When we finally pulled up to my building, I ran up the stairs 2 at a time. The apartment door was open with another officer standing guard. I pushed past him into Lily's room where she was sleeping with her stuffed unicorn tucked under her chin. The babysitter started apologizing over and over about her dead phone. I shoved money at her and basically pushed her out the door. Then I sat on the edge of Lily's bed just watching her chest rise and fall. Her drawing for training wheels was still on her nightstand. I grabbed it and tore it into tiny pieces. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept thinking about how she'd called him daddy, how she'd laughed when he taught her soccer, how she'd trusted him completely. The officer knocked on the doorframe and said David would be by later to take my statement. I nodded but couldn't look away from Lily. She stirred in her sleep and mumbled something I couldn't understand. I brushed her hair back from her face and she smiled without waking up. My phone buzzed with texts from David saying they had training wheels at the station. More texts from the reunion women with links to old news articles about the original incident. I couldn't read them yet. All I could do was sit there watching my daughter sleep, safe in her bed, while my brain kept replaying every red flag I'd missed. The way he'd shown up with 3 different takeouts, how he'd cried about needing to look good with kids, his insistence on the blanket fort. I wonder what's really going through his mind when he shows up at that therapy clinic with such a weird request. The whole Chili's deal feels like he picked the first restaurant chain he could think of. The skin-to-skin contact he'd explained away. Every single moment that should have set off alarms, but didn't because I was too busy falling for his act. Lily rolled over and her hand fell off the bed. I tucked it back under her blanket and she grabbed my finger in her sleep. I sat there for hours just holding her hand and promising myself I'd never let anyone hurt her. Outside, I could hear sirens in the distance and wondered if they were connected to what happened tonight. My phone kept buzzing, but I ignored it. Nothing mattered except the little girl in front of me who'd almost become another victim because I'd been too stupid to see what was right in front of me. The clock on Lily's dresser showed midnight when I heard car doors slam outside. My heart jumped, but I stayed frozen next to Lily's bed, still holding her tiny hand. Heavy footsteps came up the stairs and I recognized David's knock pattern on my door. I kissed Lily's forehead and tucked her hand under the blanket before tiptoeing out of her room. David stood in my hallway with a woman in a dark suit who had tired eyes and a badge clipped to her belt. She introduced herself as a detective who worked with kids and explained that David couldn't handle my case because we were family. They followed me to the kitchen where I made coffee with shaking hands while the detective pulled out a yellow notepad. She asked me to write down everything I remembered about how training acted with Lily. My hand cramped as I filled page after page about the soccer lessons in the backyard. I wrote about how he'd lift her up and spin her around when she scored. I described the movie night in the blanket fort and how his hands moved under her pajama top. The detective's face stayed blank as she read each page, but I saw her jaw tighten when I wrote about him calling Lily his princess. I remembered the drawing Lily made and ran to get it from the kitchen counter where training had left it. The paper had hearts all over it and big letters that said, "I love you, Daddy," with a stick figure family. The detective put on gloves and slipped it into a clear plastic bag while explaining they'd need a specialist to talk to Lily. David kept pacing by the window and checking his phone until the detective told him he needed to leave. He pulled me into a tight hug and his voice cracked when he said he should have checked on this guy sooner. Before walking out, he promised there'd be a cop car outside our building all night. The detective stayed another hour asking about dates and times and taking photos of my texts with training. She left at 3 in the morning after giving me her card and telling me not to talk to training if he called. I couldn't go back to sleep, so I sat at the kitchen table with my phone. Every text from him looked different now that I knew the truth. The message about wanting to build trust with Lily made my stomach turn. The photos of them playing soccer that seemed so sweet before now made me want to throw up. I screenshot everything and emailed it all to the detective's address she'd written on her card. At 5:30, I heard Lily moving around in her room, so I started making pancakes to keep my hands busy. She came out dragging her stuffed rabbit and climbed into her chair at the table. Her first question made my chest hurt when she asked where her daddy was. I told her he had to go away for work and wouldn't be back for a while. She nodded and ate her pancakes, but kept looking at the door like she expected him to walk in. I called both our jobs and Lily's school to say we were sick, not ready to explain anything to anyone. The detective called at 8 to schedule something called a forensic interview at a special place for kids. She explained it was a safe building where people who knew how to talk to kids about hard stuff would meet with Lily. The appointment was set for the next morning, and she said I could watch from another room but couldn't be with Lily during the talk. 20 minutes later, my phone rang with a number I didn't know. The woman on the other end said she was from Child Protective Services and needed to open an assessment. She kept saying I wasn't in trouble, but they had to check on Lily since a predator had been in our home. She scheduled a home visit for that afternoon and said a worker would need to see Lily's room and talk to both of us. My phone started buzzing with texts from training right after I hung up. First, he asked if I was okay and said he was worried about me. Then the messages got angry, asking why the cops showed up at his apartment. The texts kept coming, getting more desperate, begging me to call him and explain what was happening. The detective had told me not to answer but to save everything, so I just watched them pile up on my screen. Each message made me feel more sick as he went from confused to angry to pleading in the space of an hour. Around noon, the woman from the bathroom at the reunion called to check on me. Her voice was soft when she asked if Lily was safe, and I told her about the police and the interviews coming up. She started crying as she told me more about what happened to her sister all those years ago. The school board had paid her family $50,000 to sign papers saying they wouldn't talk about it. Her sister never got therapy and struggled with relationships her whole life. She said training's dad was still on the board and probably didn't even remember what his son had done. She wanted to help however she could and said she'd saved all the paperwork from back then if the detective needed it. After we hung up, I sat on my couch watching Lily color at the coffee table, trying to act normal while my whole world fell apart. The next morning, David picked us up early to drive to the Children's Advocacy Center downtown. The building looked like a regular house from outside with a playground and bright painted walls, nothing scary or official looking. Inside, a woman with gray hair and kind eyes knelt down to Lily's level and showed her a room full of toys and art supplies. She explained she just wanted to talk about the people in Lily's life while they played together. Lily looked at me nervously, but the woman said I'd be right in the next room watching cartoons if she needed me. The waiting room had a one-way mirror, but I couldn't bring myself to watch. Instead, I sat on a worn couch staring at my phone, counting the minutes while my stomach twisted into knots. David sat next to me scrolling through his own phone, occasionally squeezing my shoulder. After what felt like forever but was only an hour, the interviewer came out with Lily, who ran straight into my arms. The woman asked Lily to go pick out a toy from the treasure chest while she talked to me. She said Lily did great straight and was very comfortable talking about everyone in her life. She couldn't share specific details yet, but said there was no evidence of physical abuse, which made my knees go weak with relief. However, she noted there were concerning grooming behaviors that matched patterns they see with predators testing boundaries. The relief turned to guilt so fast I thought I might throw up right there. I brought this monster into our lives, let him hold my baby, encouraged their bond. The interviewer must have seen my face because she sat down next to me and said, "Predators are expert manipulators who fool everyone, even trained professionals." She said I did the right thing, acting immediately when I learned the truth. 2 days later, a CPS worker showed up at our apartment for the mandatory home visit. She walked through each room taking notes, checking the locks on windows, looking in our fridge and cabinets. She asked about our daily routines, who watches Lily when I work, what her bedtime schedule is like. She seemed satisfied with everything but said the case would stay open during the criminal investigation, which could take months. That afternoon, David texted me that they'd executed a search warrant on Training's apartment and devices. He couldn't share details because of the investigation, but said they found concerning items on his computer and phone. He said it was enough for the prosecutor to seriously consider charges. My hands shook reading the text. Part of me wanted to know exactly what they found, but a bigger part couldn't handle knowing. The next day, I got an email from a law firm representing Training claiming this was all a huge misunderstanding. The lawyer suggested we meet to clear things up and avoid unnecessary trauma for everyone involved. My first instinct was to delete it, but David had told me to forward everything to the detective. Within an hour, the detective called and said absolutely do not meet with them or respond in any way. He said defense lawyers often try to get victims to recant or find inconsistencies they can use later. While Lily was at her therapy appointment that week, I had a locksmith come change all our locks and install a security system with cameras. The therapist had already called me separately saying she wanted to see Lily weekly now to monitor for any delayed trauma responses. She said kids often don't show signs until weeks or months later when they feel safe enough to process what happened. I spent $300 I didn't have on the security system but couldn't sleep without it. That Friday, the local news ran a story about a man being questioned after an incident at a high school reunion. They didn't name names but said police were investigating claims of inappropriate conduct with minors. My phone started buzzing with texts from people who'd been at the reunion putting the pieces together. Some offered support while others just wanted gossip. I turned my phone off and focused on making Lily's favorite mac and cheese for dinner. Over the next week, 3 more families contacted the detective saying Training had shown unusual interest in their children at various community events. One mom said he'd volunteered to babysit her daughter after meeting them at the park. Commentary starts. Witty. Watching this mom turn detective mode while making pancakes hits different. She's keeping it together for Lily while her world burns down around her, which takes a special kind of strength most people never have to find. Commentary ends here. Another said he'd offered free tutoring to her son and always wanted to meet at his apartment instead of the library. The detective said the pattern was becoming undeniable as more people felt safe speaking up. Each new story made me feel less crazy but more guilty for not seeing the signs. 2 weeks after the reunion, the prosecutor finally met with me at the courthouse. She was younger than I expected with tired eyes and coffee stains on her blazer. She explained they were looking at charges including child endangerment and attempted grooming, but warned me these cases are hard to prove beyond reasonable doubt without physical evidence. She said Training's lawyer was already building a defense that this was all a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by gossip. She asked if I'd be willing to testify if it went to trial. The thought made me sick, but I said yes immediately. She warned me his lawyer would try to make me look like a hysterical mother who overreacted to innocent behavior. She said they'd bring up my dating history, my mental health, anything to discredit me. But she also said my testimony combined with the other families and whatever they found on his devices might be enough. The meeting lasted 2 hours, and I left feeling drained but determined. The next morning, the victim advocate called and asked if I could come in to start the restraining order paperwork. I dropped Lily at the school and drove straight to the courthouse where she met me with a thick folder. We sat in a small room with fluorescent lights that made everything look harsh. She handed me form after form, asking for specific dates and times and descriptions of every single interaction. My hand cramped as I wrote about the soccer lessons in the backyard, about the way he'd lifted Lily onto his shoulders, about how he'd asked her to sit between his legs during the movie. Each detail felt like a knife twisting deeper. The advocate read through everything when I finished and said we had enough for an emergency order, but the full hearing would take weeks. She explained that he'd get served with papers and have the right to respond and hire a lawyer. That night, Lily woke up screaming for the 3rd time that week. She kept asking where her daddy was and why he didn't come play soccer anymore. I held her while she cried and tried to explain that sometimes adults have to take breaks from each other. Her therapist had given me a script to use, but the words felt hollow in my mouth. She said it was normal for kids to miss people even when those people weren't safe. The therapist scheduled extra sessions and gave me worksheets about helping children process confusing feelings. 2 days later, my phone started blowing up with notifications. Training had posted bail and immediately went on Facebook writing long posts about false accusations destroying innocent men. He shared articles about wrongful convictions and custody battles used as weapons. His high school friends started commenting and sharing and taking sides. Some believed him completely while others stayed quiet. The woman whose sister he'd hurt messaged me screenshots of everything. Within hours, I was getting messages from strangers calling me a liar and worse. They found my Instagram and started commenting on old photos of Lily. The detective documented everything when I brought my phone to the station. She said this was witness intimidation and would help our case, but that didn't make the threats stop coming. I had to delete all my social media accounts that afternoon. My hands shook as I deactivated each one, knowing I was cutting myself off from friends and family updates. The court clerk called the next day to schedule the restraining order hearing. 3 weeks away, she said I'd have to testify about why I believed we were in danger. The thought of seeing him across the courtroom made me run to the bathroom and throw up. David came over that night and sat with me on the couch. He explained that he had to formally recuse himself from anything involving the case. No accessing files or updates or even talking to other officers about it. I understood why, but it made me feel like I was drowning alone. The victim advocate scheduled more prep sessions over the next 2 weeks. She had me practice my testimony over and over until I could say it without crying. She warned me his lawyer would try to make it look like I was a scorned woman making things up. They'd bring up my dating history and mental health and anything else they could find. She said to answer only what they asked and not to elaborate or get emotional. We practiced staying calm while she asked horrible questions about whether I'd led him on, or misunderstood innocent behavior. My stomach churned through every session. 5 days before the hearing, I got a call at 3 in the morning from building security. They'd caught someone on camera driving slowly past our building multiple times. The car matched his, and the timestamp showed 3:07 a.m. The detective added it to the stalking file and said to stay somewhere else until the hearing. I packed our bags that morning while Lily was at the school. When I picked her up, I told her we were going on a surprise trip to see Grandma and Grandpa. She was excited at first, but got quiet when she saw how many bags I'd packed. The drive took 4 hours, and she asked why we couldn't bring her soccer ball. I made up something about Grandma having toys at her house. My parents met us at the door and immediately understood something was wrong. That evening, while Lily played in the backyard, I told them everything. My dad's face turned red, and he had to walk outside to calm down. My mom held my hand and said we could stay as long as we needed. 2 days before the hearing, the advocate called with good news. All 3 women from the bathroom at the reunion had submitted sworn statements about what they knew. They described the original incident with a sister and how the school covered it up. One included yearbook photos showing the victim's age at the time. Another had kept emails from back then discussing what happened. Their courage made me cry with relief. The advocate said their testimony would make our case much stronger, since it showed a pattern going back years. She also said the prosecutor was considering additional charges based on what they'd found on his devices. The morning of the hearing arrived too fast. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I walked into the courthouse with David beside me. The wooden benches were already half full when I saw him sitting at the defendant's table in a navy suit that made him look exactly like the man who'd charmed me weeks ago. His hair was perfectly styled and he'd shaved clean, looking nothing like the monster I now knew he was. The victim advocate squeezed my shoulder as we took our seats behind the prosecutor's table. I watched him lean over to whisper something to his lawyer, a woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back tight. When he turned and caught my eye, he actually smiled like we were meeting for coffee. My stomach churned and I had to look away. The judge entered and everyone stood while my legs felt like jello. She was younger than I expected, with short brown hair and glasses that made her look serious. The prosecutor called me first, and I walked to the witness stand on legs that barely worked. My voice cracked when I swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor handed me a stack of photos I'd printed from my phone. There was him teaching Lily soccer, carrying her on his shoulders, the 2 of them building that blanket fort. Each photo made my hands shake harder as I explained when they were taken. The prosecutor asked me to read the text he'd sent about wanting to adopt more kids with me, about how special Lily was, about how he couldn't wait to be her real daddy. My voice broke completely on that last one. His lawyer stood up and started asking if I'd ever actually seen him do anything inappropriate. She kept using words like alleged and supposed and rumors. She painted me as a desperate single mom who'd fallen for small-town gossip and was now trying to ruin an innocent man's reputation. She asked if I had any actual proof besides hearsay from bitter high school classmates. The prosecutor objected, but the damage was done. Then the pale woman from the reunion bathroom walked in. His whole body went rigid when he saw her. She took the stand and started talking about her sister, who was 10 when it happened. Her voice was steady as she described finding her sister crying in her room, the months of therapy that followed, how the school board made them sign papers to keep quiet in exchange for him transferring schools. His lawyer kept objecting, but the judge allowed it as pattern evidence. The woman looked straight at him while she testified about how her sister still had nightmares 15 years later. When she finished, 2 more women came forward with similar stories from his tutoring days. The judge took a 20-minute recess to review everything. Those 20 minutes felt like hours as I sat there watching him joke with his lawyer like this was nothing. When the judge came back, her face was stone. She granted a 2-year restraining order requiring him to stay 500 feet away from me and Lily at all times. No contact through phone, email, social media, or third parties. He had to surrender any firearms within 48 hours and couldn't go near Lily's school or therapy clinic. The judge's gavel hitting the desk sounded final. We filed out into the hallway where David was talking to the prosecutor about next steps. I headed for the bathroom to splash water on my face when footsteps followed me. He was right there in the hallway, blocking my path to the bathroom door. "We need to talk about this," he said, stepping closer. "You know I'd never hurt Lily." Security was on him in seconds, pulling him back while he kept trying to talk to me. Commentary starts, skeptical. His lawyer keeps throwing around words like alleged and supposed, but then those women walk in with real stories from years ago. Makes me wonder how many times he's done this before that nobody reported. Commentary ends here. The violation was documented on the spot by courthouse cameras and the security report. The prosecutor was furious when she found out 10 minutes later. She immediately filed additional charges for violating the protective order, which apparently upgraded everything to a higher level of offense. His lawyer requested an emergency meeting about a plea deal the next morning. The following week was a blur of finding a new therapy clinic for Lily since our regular one was too nervous about him showing up. The new therapist was nice, but starting over meant Lily had to rebuild trust from scratch. She kept asking why we couldn't see her old therapist anymore, and I had to make up excuses about insurance changes. 3 weeks into the new routine, the detective called with an update. They'd found deleted photos on his devices from years ago, pictures of kids from the tutoring center. Nothing explicitly illegal, but enough to show a clear pattern of interest. The detective said they were building a stronger case with each piece of evidence. My boss called that afternoon to discuss my options. They granted me family medical leave to deal with everything, but it was unpaid since I'd used up my paid time off. The bills were already piling up from the lawyer fees, and now I'd have no income for who knows how long. I started looking at my savings account and doing math that made my head hurt. The credit cards would have to cover groceries for a while. I tried to figure out which bills to pay first. The prosecutor called every few days with updates about the plea negotiations, but each call was the same story about his lawyer fighting to reduce everything to misdemeanors. She kept warning me that trials are hard on kids, and there's never a guarantee of conviction even with strong evidence. Meanwhile, Lily started wetting the bed every single night and wouldn't let go of my hand even to use the bathroom at home. Her therapist explained this was normal for kids processing sudden loss and confusion, but watching my confident daughter turn into a scared little girl broke something inside me. The wet sheets piled up faster than I could wash them, and I started putting towels under her at night. She'd wake up crying and crawl into my bed where she'd grip my shirt so tight her knuckles went white. During the day, she followed me from room to room, dragging her stuffed animals behind her. Then his lawyer sent a letter threatening to sue me for defamation if I kept talking about what happened at the reunion. The letter said I was spreading malicious lies that damaged his reputation and career prospects. My hands shook reading it because I couldn't afford another legal battle, but I also couldn't let him silence me. I found a lawyer who agreed to take my case for a reduced rate after hearing the whole story, but even reduced rates add up fast when you're already drowning. She filed responses and sent cease and desist letters back while the bills kept coming. 6 weeks after the reunion, the prosecutor called to say he'd accepted a plea deal for attempted child endangerment and violating the restraining order. 2 years probation and mandatory registration as a sex offender, but no jail time. I sat on my kitchen floor after hanging up, feeling like someone had kicked me in the stomach. The prosecutor tried to explain that for a case with no physical abuse, this was actually a big win, and at least he'd be on the registry where other parents could see him. I wanted to scream that letting my daughter sit on his lap should count as something, but I just thanked her and hung up. The local news picked up the story when the plea deal went through, and suddenly his face was on the evening broadcast with registered sex offender under his name. People from high school started messaging me saying they always knew something was off about him. His job fired him the day after the news story, and his landlord gave him 30 days to move out. Part of me felt good knowing he was suffering, but mostly I just felt empty and tired. I started seeing a therapist myself because the guilt was eating me alive. She kept reminding me that predators specifically target single moms because we're vulnerable and desperate for help. She said I wasn't stupid or blind, just human and trying to give my daughter a good life. We worked through exercises where I had to say out loud that it wasn't my fault, but the words felt like lies every time. 3 months passed, and Lily stopped asking about him as much, though sometimes she'd still say his name when she saw someone playing soccer. Her nightmares finally stopped, and she started sleeping through the night again without wetting the bed. She even started playing with other kids at the park instead of hiding behind me. The therapist said she was remarkably resilient, but would need continued support. We decided to move to a different part of town for a fresh start where nobody knew our story. Lily got to pick the paint color for her new room and chose bright yellow like sunshine. She decorated it with butterfly stickers instead of the drawings she'd made for him, which I'd quietly thrown away weeks earlier. The new place was smaller, but it felt clean and safe. I started running into the pale woman from the reunion at the grocery store, and we began meeting for coffee once a month. She told me her sister was doing better now, knowing he was finally on the registry and couldn't hurt other kids as easily. Her sister had started college and was studying to be a social worker to help other victims. We'd sit there sharing stories about healing and moving forward while keeping an eye on the future. One afternoon, she mentioned an online support group for parents like us, and I signed up that same night. The group met every Tuesday evening through video calls, and I'd sit at my kitchen table with my laptop while Lily did homework in her room. Other parents shared their stories, and I found myself typing more than I expected about what happened to us. They understood the guilt of not seeing the signs and the fear that maybe we'd missed something important. Every week, I'd log in and watch these other parents slowly putting their lives back together just like we were. David started coming over more often after the case wrapped up, and things between us felt different now. He'd show up on Saturday mornings with his toolbox and spend hours installing new locks and security cameras around our apartment. Lily would follow him around asking questions about each tool, and he'd explain everything with the patience he never had when we were kids. The formal distance required during the investigation had been hard on both of us, but now we were finding our way back to being siblings again. He'd stay for dinner and help with dishes while telling Lily stories about when we were her age. 3 months passed before the detective called to tell me training had moved to another state where nobody knew his history. She said his registration would follow him, but warned me guys like him usually try again somewhere new. I hung up and felt my hands shaking as I watched Lily playing in the backyard through the window. The detective had given me the website to track registered offenders, and I bookmarked it on my phone to check every few weeks. 6 months after that horrible reunion night, we were finally finding our rhythm again. Lily had joined a soccer team at the school and practiced with kids her own age in the park down the street. She'd come home covered in grass stains talking about her new friends and the goals she'd scored. Her therapist said she was making good progress and the nightmares had mostly stopped. We'd moved her bed away from the window and she'd decorated her room with posters of her favorite singers. I was making dinner one Tuesday when my phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. Training had viewed my profile, which violated the restraining order we'd gotten months ago. My hands went cold as I screenshot the notification and immediately called my lawyer. She filed the violation report with the court that same afternoon and said this could mean real consequences for him. 2 weeks later, we got word that his probation had been revoked and he'd been sentenced to 30 days in county jail. It wasn't much, but at least the system was finally taking the violations seriously. The prosecutor said each violation would make the next punishment worse and create a paper trail if he tried anything again. I marked the date on my calendar when he'd be released and tried not to think about it too much. As his release date got closer, I focused on keeping our routine normal for Lily's sake. She was doing well in the school and had made 3 close friends who came over for sleepovers on weekends. They'd build blanket forts in the living room and stay up late watching movies while I made popcorn in the kitchen. She hadn't mentioned training in weeks, and her therapist said that was a good sign of healing. Tonight, I tucked her into bed and she told me all about her science project on butterflies. Her eyes were bright and clear without any of the shadows that used to live there. She showed me the drawings she'd made of caterpillars turning into butterflies and explained each stage with excitement. Tomorrow morning, we had court to extend the restraining order, but right now we were okay. She asked if her friend could come over this weekend to work on the project together, and I said yes. After turning off her light, I stood in the doorway watching her settle into sleep with her stuffed animals around her. The security system David installed beeped softly as I armed it for the night. I made myself tea and sat at the kitchen table going over the paperwork for tomorrow's hearing. My lawyer had said it should be routine, but I still felt nervous about being in the same room as him again. The victim advocate would be there, and David had taken the day off to come with us. I checked the locks one more time before heading to bed myself. Thanks for letting me share my 2 cents while you read. Hopefully my commentary didn't spoil the mood. Catch you next time, folks. Like the video. It helps more than you think.